Hi, welcome to Late Talker Journey. I'm not Colette Whelan, far less skilled than Colette, so sorry, you'll have to put up with me. I'm Steve Camerata, and I'm not in my usual chair, as you can see. I have the distinct honor and pleasure to be talking to my good friend, Steve Hammond. And the reason we have Steve here today is because he is just amazing in terms of his knowledge of education. He's been a teacher. He's been a principal, and he's been a superintendent, so he's worn many different hats. And one of the things that's a real challenge for many of our families is kind of understanding how it works in schools. And we've talked a little bit about the parents' perspective, but I brought Steve in to talk about it from the standpoint of a teacher perspective and a principal perspective, and even from a superintendent perspective. So welcome, Steve. We're so glad you could join us today.
It's a great pleasure.
So you get you're a first grade teacher, kindergarten teacher, second grade teacher. Parent comes in and says, "Hey, my child has learning differences or late talking, and there's a little difference here." What are your thoughts, and how do you handle that kind of a situation? I'll ask first in your role as a teacher.
Well, the first thing that where mine goes to is how do you differentiate? I think education is built on, or education these days is going to personalized education, and needs to, because we need to meet children where they are. So many people want to meet children where they would like them to be, but that's not realistic. All that does is bring on frustration and fear of failure and all kind of not so good things that inhibit education. It doesn't help education so much. So the first thing I think in general as a teacher is that you want to know the student. You want to get to know the student, because the student has as much to teach you or us as a teacher than we almost have to give to them. So, how do they think? What are their needs? How do they express those needs? What do they want? I've never known a child to want anything really that's bad. They're all being motivated out of a desire or a want of love and belonging, maybe to achieve, to be free, to have a certain amount of freedom, to have fun, certainly to survive in this environment we live in. But it's nothing that's ever bad. So we have a great objective as teachers to understand that child as best as we can, and then from there to say, okay, how can we craft a program that makes some sense?
So you absolutely would want Steve to be the teacher of your late talker with that kind of a philosophy. So now, thinking about it from your principal hat, and this is something that I've seen, and in fact, experienced with my own late talking son, I will say that my children were fortunate enough to be in schools that Steve was the superintendent of, and he was always welcoming and supportive of my own children. So you have a teacher that comes to you and says, and it's a great teacher, they're motivated, which, by the way, in my experience is the overwhelming majority of teachers. They're just wonderful, and they know how to teach. It's an amazing skill that they have. But a teacher comes to you and says, this little guy or this little girl, I'm teaching in the usual way, but they're just not learning. They're just not. And, I'm worried about my test scores. If I have low scores in my classroom, my name's going to be in the paper as a rotten teacher, and they're just really nervous about it. So now, putting on your principal hat, how does that look for you?
Well, I think the first thing that I would say is that every student has some issues of some kind. It could be academic, it could be sensory, it could be social, it could be physical, or a combination of all of them and more, psychological. So when a teacher comes with those kind of issues and is frustrated and is maybe a little frightened or concerned that what she's doing is not working, is that I like to think of it is that okay, if we had to do this, if failure was not an option. And we have to address this child's needs, and we have to set up an environment where he or she is going to achieve success. We have to do it. What's it going to be? And when you start thinking of it like that, is then everything is on the table. You know, the schedule's on the table, the curriculum's on the table, you know, the place in the school is on the table, the relationships are on the table. How do you leverage the best relationships you can with the child? Everything is a variable that needs to be considered to be used to make it happen for that child. So I talked to this teacher just about that. You know, what must we do then, you know, to help this child have success? And with that type of attitude and entering like that, yes, it takes time. Yes, it takes resources. And yes, it takes maybe some blood, sweat, and tears. But if you're totally dedicated to the growth and development of that child, it's worth it every time.
So, again, that sounds just fantastic. If you have a late talker get to any school that Steve's associated with immediately, one thing that happens not infrequently is sometimes our late talking children will be in a school, and for various reasons, the school decides that that child shouldn't be in their school anymore. And so the parents then get on a journey where they need to find another school. And oftentimes they'll meet with the principal. What kinds of things should they tell the principal in that situation? And what kind of things should they look for in a school when they've, basically, had a failure, had a bad match with whatever it is that they were seeking? And so now they're first, second grade, and, they need to find something else. And of course they start that conversation with the principal. So, what should they talk to the principal about, and then what should they look for in the principal's responses to kind of get the sense that this is a good match for their child?
Well, in a word, honesty and transparency. So you want to just be entirely honest, candid, transparent with your perception of what the child is experiencing. And you might bring in, evidence of that. You may bring in secondary reports of that with counselors or previous educators or testings, assessments, and the like. And that's a good thing. You want to try not to in your effort to be honest, to paint a picture that's worse than what it really is. You want to
definitely words of wisdom, because we tend to when something happens like that, we tend to focus on what went wrong rather than some of the things that may have gone right.
So that's exactly right. In every phase and in every relationship of the child's journey, we tend not to concentrate on the but we concentrate on what's going wrong. And to be able then, as a parent, to talking to the principal, to say, these are all the things that have gone right. These are the progress that he or she has made over the years. These are the things that we're so encouraged about. And then ask, does your school and does it have the resources, the physical resources, and also the philosophical resources, the willingness to assist a child like I've just described to you. And then you'll know the answer. You can read parents can read between the lines and just see through the behavior of the principal and the words to determine whether this is a good fit or not.
So in my experience, obviously the classroom teacher is central, but the principal sets the tone for the school. Mm-hmm. And so, kind of following on your recent answer, what are some questions that the principal might ask them that might give you a clue that, oh, this principal really, has the kind of attitude we've been hearing you talk about, or maybe this principal is a little bit nervous about it not working. So what, from your perspective, what are the kinds of questions that the parents can ask to really kind of elicit from the principal their philosophy and their attitude towards teaching?
I think that the first thing is to know that for any good relationship to take place, it's always a tension between the individual good and the institutional good, and to see if that can be brought together to where it's a win-win situation. There are the parent in this case and the principal in this case. They both don't want to make the mistake of putting a child in an institution that's going to set that child up for failure. Mm-hmm. You want to make sure it's a good fit. And some schools are a good fit, some schools are not a good fit. So as a principal, I would be thinking, is this a good fit? Now, my desire, my heart is saying, I want this to be a good fit. I want to see, I want to see how we can make this happen. But knowing through experience that sometimes it's not a good fit and it's not going to happen, and it can be more damaging than helpful. So the questions that I would ask is, is there anything you're not telling me that would make a difference in the fit, in the potential fit of this your child with this institution? And I would say, I would preface that to the parents and say, there's nothing more than I would like is to have this school be a good fit for your child. But let's be careful, because if it's not a good fit, you don't want the child here, and to be clear about that. And then, to try to create a relationship of trust. You can do that immediately, and talk about, okay, let's see if let's kind of push the boundaries and see if this is how good of a fit that is.
All right. Well,
does that make sense?
It makes great sense, and I wish you were training principals across the country. I've encountered so many good principals and teachers, but this one is just one of the very best. So thanks so much for joining us today and sharing your insights. And it's just fantastic. And I do want to encourage parents. Sometimes you can feel like the world's against you, but there are a lot of Steve Hammonds out there. And I'll conclude with saying that I have firsthand knowledge from a late talking child, not my own, that came into Steve's school, who had been through a few bumps in the road, and he just did a fantastic job with that young man and his family. So I know firsthand that he's absolutely terrific. So find the Steve Hammonds of the world. They exist, and be transparent. I think that's really the take home message here, and that when it's a good match, it's good. Don't try to force something that's not a good match. Thank you so much, Steve, and I hope you can join us again in the future.
Thanks so much. I'd be happy to.